Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Vickers. And can I pay tribute to the two members who brought the debate? I mean, it is a case of singing the greatest hits of the past. I recognise singing the old songs in a sort of beautiful duet between the two of them, presaging some appalling coalition one day. But I particularly pay tribute to the Honourable Lady, who I recognise her expertise and her interest in this topic. And she invoked, speaking of greatest hits, she invoked Elsa in Frozen. I recognise the self-identification of all people. That her soul spiralling, her soul spirals with frozen fractals. But she has a warm heart underneath. We do know in that film, of course, what happened at the end, which is that Elsa returned to the castle. And I think that is indeed the ultimate purpose of members speaking in this debate. They do want to return into the embrace of the EU. And I honour that, and I accept that they were not happy with the result of the referendum. I wouldn't have been happy if it had gone the other way, and I wouldn't have given up campaigning to leave. I wish there were more honesty on that side of the House, nevertheless, to recognise that what is being debated here is the first step to rejoin. That is the underlying purpose, because all the arguments that have been made against the previous deal were really arguments against Brexit. Yeah. And all the arguments that are being made in support of this arrangement are arguments for rejoin, particularly, as we've just heard, so very eloquently put by the honourable member who spoke before. The case for cooperation in Europe is really a case for rejoining. Happy to give way, yeah.
And the point is, if they're prepared to compromise on dynamic alignment for food and agricultural products, where is any issue of principle as a barrier to prevent them extending that cooperation on other products or other fields of European law where they think it is ideologically convenient for them to do so? The only problem, of course, is they think they're currying favour with the European Union by doing so. They are going to be disappointed because the EU will simply ask for more concessions without making any concessions of their own.
Well, I'm very grateful, and of course, my honourable friend is right. Indeed, and I want to quickly cite the very good article in The Spectator last week by Oliver Lewis, who was the deputy negotiator for the Brexit deal and then for the trade agreement, who wrote rather wearily about recognising the terms that have been agreed by this government, because they were the terms that our government continually resisted in those negotiations. And his point, echoing my honourable friend's point, there was the extent to which the way the EU works, that it forces agreement on headline principles, which then, over the course of time, are translated into concrete policy, and where a thin end of the wedge can be driven in, as it can be here, as we've seen with this agreement, more and more follows. And that's exactly what we should anticipate. So what we have here, and it's worth pointing out how thin the terms of this agreement are, how much detail still remains to be worked out. What we have conceded is a set of principles which will allow ever closer alignment and submission to the regime that we painfully left some years ago. So we see it coming, the submission to the European Court of Justice, an agreement on rule-taking, as my honourable friend has pointed out, a return to the single market in agribusiness, and of course paying money into the EU budget. These were the explicit things on which, in fact, all of our parties in this House committed not to ending when we agreed with the outcome of the referendum. And in 2019, both main parties agreed to abide by. In 2024, agreed to abide by and explicitly ruled out submission to the European Court, paying money, return to the single market, all of which has now been agreed in principle by the government. So it is only a set of principles, but they are bad principles, and they represent a betrayal of Brexit and of our manifestos. So I don't want to, Mr. Vickers, I won't take the House's time with going through the specifics, because other members have done so very well. I do want to quickly point out how thin these agreements are. I mean, on e-gates, I mean, there will be some benefit for the door-to-door and visiting community that some of us have in some of our constituencies. But it is not a great achievement. And indeed, it's not even an achievement for this summer. So it might be that the member for Clacton is enjoying his holiday. I hope he is in France. I don't think he would have benefited from this deal, although probably he's gone through an e-gate already, because there are already many e-gates that British citizens can use going to and fro. But that arrangement will still need to be negotiated with each member state operating its own independent policy in this regard. We've discussed food. I won't go on about that other than we recognise that we've agreed to take their laws, but we do not have detail yet. And because we export so little, any benefit from any reciprocal arrangement is going to greatly benefit the EU at the expense of our exporters. Happy to give way.
Just to illustrate that point, looking at the figures, Britain, the UK is the EU's biggest export market. We receive about 51 billion euros worth of goods from the EU and return about 15.4 billion. So there's no doubt about where the balance lies there. And I think making the point that emphasising the point he made, the problem is that so much of this is smoke and mirrors. I mean, when you hear about realignment being dynamic or about subsidiarity, as we used to hear, these are terms that are used to disguise exactly the kind of pernicious detail that he set out.
I am very grateful, and absolutely, I'm afraid to say that the argument against EU membership, which was the trade imbalance, remains, and it has only grown with time. So I won't talk about our unhappy fish, Mr. Vickers. We hear enough about those poor creatures. But likewise on defence, no detail in the plan other than an expectation, this new procurement arrangement, other than an expectation that we will be contributing financially to that. No detail on the carbon trading arrangement other than a clear expectation of higher taxes and rule taking through the emissions scheme. And then on free movement, we are unclear. It talks about the terms to be mutually agreed. So what those terms might be, how many people will be coming, what commitments of support for them, with the housing, public services, benefits, what happens if they refuse to leave. All of that still remains unclear, and I'm very worried about the direction of travel. The good news, Mr. Vickers, just to conclude, is that none of this is real. These are all headline principles. And although, as I say, the expectation is that the EU, having forced the famously legalistic Prime Minister of ours to sign up to a set of agreements, will then induce him to believe that these are binding commitments and that he will have to honour them in practice. I implore him not to, and I implore the Minister to consider we don't have to fulfil these terrible terms. Lastly on the economy, it is worth pointing out, while people talk about the decline of trade since Brexit, trade was declining substantially long before Brexit. The EU is a declining corner of the world's economy, and the direction of travel has not changed much. So, and the fundamental point is, economically, Brexit has been largely a non-event. As my honourable friend has said, the underlying realities have remained largely untouched by Brexit. Obviously, our economy was badly hit by COVID and the Ukraine war, and subsequently by the very bad budget. And again, I'll admit some economic mistakes made by the last government. Let's be honest. But fundamentally, the problems have been not related to Brexit. So just to invoke some heroes of the last Parliament, particularly John Redwood, the great economic prophet of recent times. John Redwood shrugs at Brexit, but Bill Cash rejoices, because fundamentally this was not an economic decision that the British people made. It was about the restoration of sovereignty. And what it did was restore the possibility of good government to our country. I'm afraid to say we didn't get good government immediately after Brexit, and we certainly don't have it now. Many mistakes have been made and continue to be made, particularly by this new government. But we now have the opportunity to govern ourselves in a way that will bring about the prosperity of the British people. Just to quickly acknowledge the point made by the member for Strangford, we still haven't fixed the ongoing saga of Northern Ireland, and I deeply regret that the arrangements there persist in this most unsatisfactory way. But the point about this new agreement is that it is clearly a declaration of intent to move back within the orbit of the EU and ultimately to rejoin. And let me end by echoing the call made by many members on both sides, and I honour the member for Walthamstow for her support for this. It is very, very important that we do restore the European Scrutiny Committee, and I hope the Minister will agree with that. Thank you.